if I'm going to be able to, truly deliver the end of the class, because we go linearly. So I will do my best, but probably it's going to, many questions will remain there, which is not bad, but definitely maybe we will follow up differently individually or through our universities. So the last meeting goes a bit beyond nudges, in the sense that many of the comments, concerns, discussions that we had were touching on, some of the weak points there. Yeah, maybe we do not learn, maybe, there are bad outcomes through this type of interventions. And there is a name for them, and there are variations that I will mention in the first part. And then secondly, also beyond nudges, I'm going to introduce one of the behavior change methodologies that it is very well known and applied. Mentioned a couple of them, but just briefly go into more details for one. And the logic of a methodology is that it actually considers behavior more comprehensively, right? So nudges are very spot on, and maybe they can, ignore important things. But when you go through the steps of a methodology, then basically you're going to find there a diagnosis of the problem that says, yeah, maybe, this is a critical point to consider, or maybe it's more about the community and not only the individuals. And the idea of a nudge, or the idea of, smaller techniques, goes under this, bigger objective of the methodology, that sometimes is also influencing the individuals, but also proposing maybe changes at the public administration level, or, changes around. So it's not only the will of the individual there. So I think that this should kind of put things in a better perspective, that we are not only attempting, very, on point things that maybe are not sustainable, or maybe, they're exaggerating some topics, but we attempt to look at them, or at least there is an informed attempt to look at them at a deeper level with more things to discuss. So in this order, I'm going to introduce further jargon here, that it is somehow not very easy to translate for all of us that are not English natives. So we started with nudge, right? And then there are two more ideas that have been promoted lately. The second one is this idea of a boost, right? Similarly, a type of intervention, but the boost should be, as it is described there, less of a push, but something that involves more awareness, and basically something that helps the individual to develop something better. Not in the same traditional way, because, this is education, so you develop better through education and so on. The boost is still, a bit of a shorter solution, but nonetheless, it should make you aware of the issue and better at doing something, that is critical. So somehow, in the photo that has become very popular for nudges, the first one is the big elephant that pushes the small elephant, right? So this is the nudge, go in that direction, like the parent. You don't know exactly why, but I'm putting this so that you go in that direction. The other one, it says, you need to hop on this, and this could be, better dealing with numbers, or better understanding some part of information, or doing this, but this is going to support you to reach there. Yeah, so basically it should be something more practical, but you need to understand it. You need to get on it, by your own will, and then to understand what it is there. So this idea of having better competences that will help us to make better decisions, right? So basically identifying these parts that are, smaller, because in general, you can say, how can one decide better? So you go to the university, you hope that you're going to be a better decision maker. But this is maybe not focused enough, So you say you have various types of knowledge, but what should you know in order to organize that particular knowledge, So basically give a sense of priority, give a sense on how to deal with certain type of knowledge that one could get by itself, herself, himself, or it could get easier through a more specific training. So this is the logic of boosts. Basically, their specific difference by comparison to nudges is a bit on, what you see here is a bit on the logic that while we understand that we have, various types of issue in reaching the rational decision, various types of boundaries, various types of failures, the logic here is with boost, is to overcome them and not simply avoid them through, a type of intervention. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that with this that, boosts could solve everything, because then we would go back to the initial logic. So that would mean that everything that it is unconscious could be solved. But there are alternatives, in the sense that at least when one looks at the menu of interventions and says, maybe this type of nudge is a way in which I'm not respecting very well the autonomy of some people. So maybe I should at least start with some type of boosts, trying to see what can I improve in a more focused way, and then see if I can at least complement nudges with this, right? So in this sense, it is an approach that seems to be complementary. It is an approach that says, when we can do this, let's look at the competences, without neglecting the fact that sometimes, maybe indeed there are no resources, or there is not a possibility to do this. Yeah, so this is also important. So what are examples of this type of types of boosts? So there are, in many cases, of course, where do we see a lot of biases? So of course that this happens when we do not really understand risk very well, and we can be induced very easily by some types of information, and this is heavily linked with how we understand statistics and probabilities, right? So the fact that this is in general complicated, so when you hear there is a risk of something, and then, there's a red button there, but then if the risk is 5%, it's not that big, so you need to understand it. And the usually boosts here are saying 5% is so abstract for most people. So if you tell them maybe 5 out of 100 cases could, go into this, then it becomes a bit clearer. If you draw a picture and you explain 5 what from 100 what, then it goes even better. So saying the same thing, but not simply saying, oh, if you do not know probabilities, then you're stupid, you deserve your fate. Yeah, clearly this is not a way to go. Ignoring completely this idea of having some type of statistical literacy is also not something that we should do, with nudges. And we see that this is not the way. In many cases, for instance, this was a huge debate with the pandemic approach, and how you present statistics about efficiency of vaccines, about, people that die, that are on various levels. And of course, that with efficiency, for instance, there are explicit studies saying that people do not get the logic of what means to be 95% confident that a certain thing is going to work. So when you tell them I'm 95%, in their head is, so you don't know exactly what are you doing, the rest of 5% could kill me. If you tell them 100%, you're going to lie to them, because this is not true. So educating a bit in this logic that, it is a bit on the reverse. When you hear that something is completely sure, you should have a trigger alarm, how one can be 100% sure of something, because everything in terms of how it is tested statistically has some intervals there, right? So of course you can increase a bit, but 100%, especially from things that are at the beginning, it's very hard. So this idea of really understanding from simple probabilities to something a bit more complex on how you test the accuracy of things is very important. Then boosts, relevant boosts are in this idea of how you deal with a lot of information and how you prioritize. And this is split per fields. Yes, with finances, it is important but not vital necessarily, to have better investments and so on. It is nonetheless in our days vital not to be fooled by people that phone you or ask you for information. So that could also be vital. But what we have here as examples, these are many of them competences linked to primary, healthcare, things that you should be able to recognize, just for instance, as it is here, to have vital signs, to call 911 in case of emergency, to be able to distinguish between, things that are more or less important, not by considering that you need to know, textbooks, medical textbooks, but there are, things that tend to be recursive. This, for instance, has been implemented in urgency rooms, like hospital urgency rooms, with actual doctors that, of course, that they know what they should look for, but it works much better if they have a poster on the wall and it says, first thing first, what is the temperature of a baby that is under 2 years? If it's more than 39, 40 degrees, then this is huge. You need to go on perfusion and so on. You do not need to check something else, so it's vital to move clearly. Similarly, with signs of a heart attack or things like this. So basically, these are usually approaches that are designed based on decision trees. If something is bigger or smaller than this, you move into this direction. If it's the other way, you move in the other direction. And again, it works much better even if those people there are professional, because it gives you a clearer picture. If it's not an emergency state, of course, you have time to discuss, but basically it shows you what we understand to be vital from various data sets, right? So this idea of not letting people to deal with a lot of information, but trying to organize it and to give particular thresholds, when it is important to do this, if a particular indicator is bigger or smaller than that, is a way that provides much more sense in the decision and improves efficiency, right? And this is basically also the third one, that in many cases, of course, that while we would like to have the entire information, then probably it's not going to happen. So instead of just not considering at all, determining some type of smart rules of thumb, some type of shortcuts is actually what you want to have, again, per field and per decisions. But this is something that we see more and more. Maybe you also see it in your students, their decisions, if they are not guided somehow, they are very polarized. They are either learning or not doing anything, because somewhere in the middle, they don't know exactly what to do. So somehow a path that says, yes, okay, maybe you cannot follow everything, but there is a threshold here. You need to at least attend these foundations in order to be able to move there. And then we discuss, you need to be able to read at least these parts of the class so that we move on. I mean, things that we already know, but they are not formulated so that people actually are aware of this. And in a way, they do not become explicit competences for most people, just for the ones that are actually good at dealing, and they just take they extract the good parts here. So this is clearly a category of intervention that it is very context specific, right? So for instance, these ideas that I was mentioning, how we present risk information in a way that actually speaks more to the individuals, right? So what has been tested over and over is that it works better to say, 5 out of 105%. So completely putting this type of natural frequencies so that people understand this. And this also put in a graph, if you have 100 people and 5 of them fall out of the window because of something, it's clearly much more intuitive, right? And then, yeah, what I was again mentioning, this type of tools for having a better type of checkup. This is the example for the medical approach, but then again, it applies to examples that we see in other cases of experts that have to review a lot of information. For instance, judges or prosecutors, when they look at various cases, these cases we have, historically. So we are able to understand what predicts better, for instance, the probability of a felon to commit again a particular crime, right? So this is, for instance, very robust for domestic violence or for various type of infractions. So then you have, what you should look for as triggers. There is maybe a substance abuse. If that is there, this increases the probability of this happening again. If there are other aggravating factors. So basically, these are tools that, one has based on the data and can help filter out a lot of the information. It doesn't mean that we do not need to consider, case by case, but realistically, it is much better to have rules based on statistics than just rules based on what's in our head, as being important. Sometimes, yeah, maybe they coincide. So what you think as being an important predictor also is, highlighted in the data, but not always, right? So just to to point out that nowadays we do have access to more tools to extract this type of information, right? So I was teaching this class to future judges, and they were saying, "Oh, but we do not know statistics. We do not know how to build a decision tree, so this is not in our training." I say, "Yes, but you have the data and you have artificial intelligence. If you tell them, take these 20 cases and just create a path of this and then repeat on other cases and see what it is, you get a photo." So the logic is to know what to ask, because there is data there that, of course, you're not going to be able to consult. It doesn't mean that you need to build a model to publish in a paper. It means that you need to understand where to look for with the tools that we have, right? Of course, this was possible also before, if one would collaborate with someone else, but now it becomes easier. And the logic of looking into the literature is that there are a lot of ideas of people that tried things, so you don't even actually have to come up with all this by yourself, but just to consider the process of making decisions. And I think that this is really important, not only for us like general public, but for people. As we have more expertise in the field, we become more and more rigid somehow, because we believe that our experience is going to protect us from all these biases. And of course, in many cases, there are cases in which you can't really have a super huge experience. But even that could be limited to, I don't know, I've worked a lot with Romanian students, right? So the number is big, but the geographical sample is small. So clearly it comes just from one type of culture. The ones that are different are very little. So I understand this, but I do not know what is the impact of this on my decision. So then when I can access other information, then it makes sense. So of course that, first thing is just to accept that we may need tools. The second one is to take what we have and to use it a bit better. So I would say that this is, kind of what I see as being the appeal of this type of boosts, that they can help us exactly as a tool. And now we are somehow lucky enough that we do have enough computational, enough process power to ask for these things to be better built. So it is an important comparison, what we have here, because if we are able to focus more on boosts, then of course that we are able to move a bit the impact that we hope to gain through a nudge on the short run, into something that it is more sustainable, that is going to actually happen on the long run, because I've built a manner of approaching things, processes, and not only on solving situation, which is, of course, something that is, highly valuable by comparison to, other type of fixes. Sorry. And here there are, as I was saying, various types of discussions on how easy is on how easy is to interact with, to distinguish between nudges and boosts. Yes, regarding the question of Ambar, which is the strongest in terms of the information, especially on social media, I think somehow it's hard to say, but what I see on social media can be somehow related to a lack of understanding samples and variations in statistics, because many of the information there are very vivid, very, emotional. This happened there, it was, in general, it's a bad thing, it's a crime in that particular neighborhood, it's, theft, something for the government, and so on, which in itself, of course, it is a bad thing. But if you think in this, our neutral perspective statistically, and you start thinking, okay, so to what extent this applies to a larger part of the population, to which extent you can understand what are determinant factors of here and what are the associated probabilities and so on. In many cases, I'm not saying that in all of them, but putting this into a broader perspective with clearer statistical data when it's possible, you're going to see that the incident, while it is, hardly damaging in that context for the people involved there, as a fact in itself, maybe it's not something that scales up. Maybe it's not something that, should generate this type of, rage behavior in all parts, because not all the contexts are the same, not in all communities. And also somehow maybe it's not something that we need to promote that much, which is also something that is happening in social media, because we are just maintaining the same logic of putting forward an information under this falsehood that if you see it more often, then probably it's more true, which is not necessarily the case. So sometimes, if we reflect a bit better on it, and at least we are not sure if we should promote it, if you want to share it or give it a like or follow it, it's still a good thing, because we are minimizing this type of frenzy, which is a false impression that we have documented in this type of biases, that if you see or if you hear more one thing, then probably it is truer or more frequent, which is not the case. Yeah, this is basically what we see in social media. There are bubbles in which a particular topic is super hyped, but this is not representative for entire communities, for entire populations. And we do not have always the time or the competence in terms of what we're discussing to actually look for the background information, what is the statistical reality. Because of course that in our day-to-day behavior, we're not going to be able to see, statistical realities. We are in our own bubble. I tend to discuss a lot with my colleagues that, and maybe it's also the case of Lima, that capital cities and surrounding areas are in general, with more business, with university booming. So life is different. For instance, for Romania, this is very true. We always tend to discuss that you have two countries, one that's around the capital city, and then a couple of other big countries, and then something else. So I understand that even if I can say, I've seen this with my own eyes, metaphor, and I see it every day, that this is not the reality to generalize for the entire country. So to that extent, I tend to believe that this idea of seeing things in a statistical perspective, which is not possible physically all the time if you do not travel or if you do not have enough exposure, but seeing it with the help of data and with the help of enough information to help you put to formulate some good question, so maybe you are unsure about what you should believe. Is the criminality rate so high that maybe it's better for me not to send my kid to school? Maybe I need to go homeschooling. And then I can search, and see maybe there are patterns for regions, for neighborhoods, for whatever it is, what type of incidents there are, what is their frequency, and so on. And I have a better picture. In most cases, this is not first-hand information that you can have. So it's not a report maybe that it is published, but sometimes this could also be true. It's somehow a second-order information. You need maybe to corroborate a couple of sources. And as I was saying, to ask somebody, an AI or a person, to make a bit of sense of this. But this is I would say, one of the most scientific approaches and one of the most rational ones, just to be able to say, it is a case, I understand it is important, but, it doesn't drive all my perceptions and decision from this. If I'm able to put next to the case the relevant statistics, then basically I move from a small part of the picture to an entire picture, and this should be helpful. And of course, I'm probably going to have a hard time to do this with everything. But with decisions that are, more relevant, is good to do. And in respect to social media, I think that according to what we see, one of the most relevant preventive strategies would be for people not to share that easily information about which they are not sure in terms of context, in terms of sources, and so on. If we would share less, we wouldn't create this very, very circular approach of seeing the information everywhere. So maybe we believe it or not, but maybe we want to act a bit more cautious, which is probably something that is happening in real life, so you hear a lot of things, but you are a bit more discreet on, just voicing out various types of beliefs. But social media has made this approach much more easier, which means that, it is easier for the approach to eliminate various rational tools that we can have and just put out there everything, so in the sense, it would be nicer if we could do this without another authority, imposing what we said in the beginning of the class, just banning things or saying you're not allowed to do this and this, because this probably is going to generate a lot of resistance. But trying to, educate people on how to perceive, better this type of information, that would probably be a good approach. Difficult to implement in practice, but for us individual, if you want to improve, I think it's definitely great. This is also something that works a lot in terms of how we can maybe apply this type of logic in organizations. Of course, that this is in itself an entire area of research, how to improve to be more efficient in organization. In many cases, the type of efficiency approaches are at the bigger level, just to create procedures and flows and things like that. But if we actually look at this micro level, then we're going to see that there are a lot of things also to consider here on how to use this type of tools of boosts based on identifying clearly the decisions where we would see this need for better judgment, to try to consider what could be a mistake here, a bias, and to create a type of alternative approach to improve this. So for instance, here, I just put a couple of examples by the field in an organization. I would just go as an example. This is something that I discuss often in my classes on human resources approach. So when you ask people that are doing interviews, how they do it, and one question is, do you ask the same questions to everyone? And a lot of the recruiters that I've talked to, they say, no, of course. It is in my ability of an interviewer to ask different questions to each of the candidates for the same position I'm referring, not in general, So you have 10 people applying to be an operation managers. And they're saying, no, of course, we do not ask them the same thing, because this is part of our talent to ask them various questions. But then, if we look at the decision process behind this, we see that this is an approach that it is in general quite flawed. Because if for some people you ask them, what were your biggest successes in the last position? And for other people, you ask them, how did you manage dealing with people that were conflictual? These two things are incomparable in terms of answers. Maybe the success is going to resonate a lot with you. Maybe the other one with conflict is going to tell you, so you don't actually work that well with people. So they're going to give you two responses that is going to make very hard for one, whoever it is, to make a comparative approach. So scientifically and in line with the logic of eliminating bias, the logic is to have same questions. And what we have there, so basically a structured interview with clear criteria for each. So you ask all of them about their success, and then you compare in between. Clearly, maybe, one is going to be able to say about more, but you compare on that rubric. Then you ask everyone about how they manage conflict, and you compare on this. But the logic is to keep the key points. Of course, there could be chit chat and things like this, but to keep the main criteria the same for everyone, because this is the way in which you can have a transparent process for you, as a hiring person, in terms of how you compare people. So this, for instance, seems to be very counterintuitive. And in general, people are saying that, this is a bit too boring. It's, not the way we do things. But in this type of boredom, in this type of systematic approach, lies a more rational perspective. Because if not, yes, everyone could claim that they are unbiased, but the type of questions that one puts if they're very different, are simply signal of a bias. So this is just one idea, to work with this type of, structured approaches, and to have a type of a toolkit that one could handle. And the same, of course, goes on various types of interventions, in which, providing tools when the evaluation is too complex, is always a tested approach that works better. I'm not saying that being creative doesn't work, but we do have a line that has a better rate of success, and it is much more comparable. So in this way, you are actually building competences. Yes, thank you, Carmen. So indeed, the distinction is not clearly well articulated. And, as you say, some of the nudges, because nudges were first, so there is much more literature on them. So some of them can actually feel like a boost, so when you see a better representation of statistical information, this is both a nudge and a boost, because it goes in the principle of having simplified approaches. And then, yes, you can actually be more constructive and say, I want to create the competence through this, so I'm going to help you to make sense of this approach looking at numbers. So at the end of the day, I mean, of course, that when I teach this, when we discuss this as a field, we are trying to put conceptual boundaries there. These are more like a nudge, these are more like a boost. The reality probably is less, careful on distinguishing between them. But I think that the conceptual nuance that it is important here is that not all boosts are mindless, are, in the category of defaults, or in the category of pushing influences with no type of, respect for people's autonomy and competences. So yes, if we are able to go more into this direction, probably is better. If we are able to combine between them, it is better. If we just say that all of them are nudges, then I think this is also fine, at the end of the day. So it's not the distinction that is relevant. But there are places in which, when something is labeled a bit more specifically, it helps, to push a particular perspective, or it helps people to accept it a bit easier, or to promote it a bit easier. I think that to that end, maybe saying this is a bit more, useful on some levels. Yeah. Okay, and now moving to the other side of the nudge. So boosts were, the more constructive approach of offering competence building and so on. The negative side of nudges has received this name of sludge. So you see there various types of synonyms: dark nudges, fishing, baiting, exploiting one's cognitive biases. Basically, all the ways in which one can use this power of understanding what actually captures our attention and behavior, but not for the well-being of the individual or of the consumer, but for the well-being of some other type of authority, either a company or the state. So sludge is something through which you advance, very hard. So basically, it's this idea of introducing friction or some type of barriers that makes everything in terms of processes difficult to complete, to navigate, to so on. And basically, it impedes people to either make a decision or to go, for a decision that would be more relevant for them. So to that end, this is basically their type of classification or definition, that you can have sludges that either discourage behavior that would be something good, a behavior that would be good for the individual. For instance, if you want to claim some type of tax credit or a rebate from the state, but the process is so difficult, so hard, so, time consuming, so uncomfortable in different ways, that you actually don't want to do it. And in many cases, this type of so hard is not objective. But for instance, if I know that I need to fill in a form of 10 pages that I cannot do online, I have to print it to go there, objectively, one could say, yeah, if you want your money back or a subsidy, probably it's not that bad. But if I observe empirically that, for people, this is something that it's completely out of their normal schedule or out of their, normal use, and I still leave this type of process in place, then I say, instead of helping individuals to find their way for their best, I have a policy that says, this is good for the citizens, but the citizens simply do not want to take it, because I introduced this type of sludge. And then also sludges are considered the ones that are encouraging behaviors that are, not efficient for individuals. So things that are presented in a way that attract people without thinking too much, or without considering options. Okay, let's do this type of subscription. It's good for you on the short run. You can always say that you don't want it, but maybe, when you want to say that you don't want it, you're going to need to stay with somebody on the phone for 2 hours because, there are not operators. And then you're going to just give up and maybe still pay that particular subscription. So it is something that, pushes you in a bubble, but then it's harder to get out of there. And this, again, it is what's considered a type of baiting people into this. Yes. So these are actually some of the classical examples here. And I mean, in general, people may have various types of examples that could move around this. Yeah, so canceling subscriptions is quite common. So it's very easy to do them. Sometimes, even pushy, just to go there. But because the process of unsubscribing is so hard in terms of waiting time or doing various things, or having to do very small things that are time consuming and resource consuming, you can stay with them, which is definitely not something that in the end is useful, especially when there is a potential cumulative effect of having too many subscriptions. And the same is when you want something, but the process is, as I said, so bureaucratic in terms of not being access to have everything online, or that the information is simply not updated, and you go to a place and you see, oh, but I just need another document or something else, which can, determine people not to go the second times and so on. Now, this discussion with sludges that basically, as I would say, they impede you to advance on something, also has an interesting drawback, an interesting question that asks, as you see there, asks us to reflect on the fact that maybe it's not always bad to have things at a slower pace, basically, to not solve everything, on the spot, and to slow down some of the decisions. So it is a fine line in between, having more time to think on some type of decisions. And creating this per se as a rule, everything has to be lengthy. And it is important to consider what do we want to slow down as a policy, or as an approach, because this can lead to various it can have various implications. So I'm just going to put one example here. That is interestingly moving, for instance, the debate between having a gun in the US. So it's a US example. So having the right to own a gun versus introducing a waiting period for obtaining that particular gun. So a much softer debate, just saying, okay, you can have the gun, but with this type of waiting period. So in order to decide on this, you see this very nice study that starts from a critical context, of course, that owning a gun is associated with a huge number of deaths, from incidents, not only intentional, right? But you see that it is similar to number of deaths by motor vehicles. And the logic in this case was just to see if implementing this waiting time, what they were calling a cooling off period between the purchase and the acquisition, may actually change a bit the outcomes, in the light of the fact that many of the crimes that are happening are because people have an impulse, they're upset, they're angered, and so on. And when you are able to access the gun immediately, you follow your impulse, and the result is disastrous. But if introducing this type of waiting period could actually help people to cool off, and you see that they looked at different states where the period was between 2 and 7 days. Yeah, so this was realistically, they look at existing data. And basically what they did was, to compare states with this type of waiting period and states with no waiting period, what they call the difference, for a long period of time. And so because they were having both the intervention and the non-intervention, this is actually a causal result that we have. So basically, having this waiting period actually reduces gun homicides by 17%. So it is not a simple association, it's cause and effect. So basically, by understanding that, the implication of creating, if you want, an inefficiency in the system. You cannot get something as fast as you want. You need to wait. So this waiting period has a particular role. If we just look at it neutral, you say it's a sludge, it's inefficient from a bureaucratic perspective. But the inefficiency here actually induces more rationality in the further decision that is seen in the behavior. So 17% just by, as it says there, changing the process and not the option. This is huge. Of course, changing the option could be, one could claim even better, you can have higher rates. But even this, when there is no political will to have this, just looking at, how a small introduction can go, 20% it's huge, So this idea of not saying all sludges are bad is also important, because it says, yes, on some things, we actually need to consider things a bit better, So I was going with the example on social media that says, simply thinking a bit more about posting or sharing something actually works. Yeah, so you may see something that you do not have time to check for factuality, to consider, what are the implications if you push it forward. But if you are not able to do it immediately, but you need to wait, not 7 days, but maybe, a certain amount of minutes, then you can think a bit better and say, maybe I should skip this one. I don't want to put it. you know. And yeah, the same for other important events at the higher level, you know. So if you want to get a divorce, yes, maybe the fact that you cannot get it immediately, even if it's an amicable one, you know. So if you both agree, and you can still have some time to think about it, you know, maybe it's going to change somehow the decision, you know. So basically, reconsidering also what we understand by nudges and sludges in terms of access to things is important, because, you know, not everything can be judged the same, you know, in terms of if it's a good or a bad decision. Yes, of course, that, yeah, one could claim in some cases the divorce is the best decision ever, so I should make, you know, things very smoothly, you know, on this level. And in other cases, one could say, okay, but what are the implications of having this very smoothly? Maybe because we are not rational, in some cases, we're going to jump there a bit too fast instead of, you know, considering some alternative options. So having this somehow on a balance and saying, yes, maybe you do not want a nudge in terms of making everything faster, yeah, could help, you know, the outcome that should actually be better for all of us in society. Okay. Yes, please, Amber.
Oh, well, thank you, Professor Rodica, for all the information. And I want to say what I understand, if it's correct, about the sludge. So, since I understand it, the sludge are like a way to persuading people, but slightly reducing their autonomy to choose another decision later, like making like with a time to people to choose another decision. So like I understand that it could be bad, because in some cases, for example, when we want to cancel a subscription, for example, no, some sludge reduce the time to cancel that subscription. So for us, it's like is maybe bad because we want to cancel that and now, but for the company maybe it's like a way to tell us to think twice or three times to cancel that. But in some cases it's good, for example in that case of the divorce or social medias, because they tell us to think twice, or maybe they give us a time to overthink about it, so we can make another decision that is maybe good for us. So it's like it's not always bad, but it has its good side and his maybe bad side also. But it's not
Mhm.
like always bad or always good, right?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, thank you. I think you summarize it very well. You know, at the end of the day, nothing is always bad or always good, but we tend to approximate it like this. You know, so somehow, yes, I believe that a bit the status quo would be that, you know, nudges are good, sludges are bad. But of course, you know, as it is with boosts, yes, yeah, there are different dimension of the same problem, and if they're good or bad, they depend on the intention of who is using it and on this possibility of understanding things in perspective. You know, so somehow, you know, the logic of solving something that it is an urgent situation, you know, like with divorce in between two individuals, it's one, you know, in a case in which you really maybe want to have the divorce and to move forward, and you may be tempted to do everything for what seems to be the immediate need of us as individuals, as consumers, you know, having this type of instant gratification. While in other cases, even if we want this, you know, we are able to observe that if we look at the numbers, at the outcomes that we get, things are actually not better for us in terms of well-being, you know. So I can, you know, order everything at my home and I say, you know, this is the the maximum of efficiency. But this would mean that, maybe I'm not working enough to go pick up things. Maybe I'm not interacting enough with people. Maybe I do not understand what are the, let's say, bad implications that I introduce in the society, for the people that are delivering, if I'm, just pushing everything. So, and of course, I'm probably not able to do this as an individual. That's why I need a type of, expertise or discussion about these interventions, especially if they are made at the public level. For organizations, I think that things are much less transparent. So I think that, companies tend to do whatever they want in terms of, maximizing a bit their profit. And in this case, it is the role of the consumers to be able to push them a bit more and to say, I actually recognize what you're doing here with your process of not making my life easy when I want to unsubscribe, and as a consumer, to voice this out and to say, this is part of a bad pattern of behavior and you shouldn't do it, while in another case, the local government should be able to introduce this type of inefficiency. So I believe that the value of this type of, differences in between them is to understand that we need to, make people or authorities accountable on the context, even if we do not have the entire information. But sometimes, this process is easier if you are able to catch a concept and you say, maybe I suspect a sludge here. So let's have a discussion to what extent, what you have here as a procedure is a sludge because it is intentional. So you intentionally want me not to do this, or maybe it's something that you haven't thought about. And, as it happens with many public administration, you have a system that is so old and it is not adapted to people and to how they build, and it's just inefficient. And you expect people to navigate them, even if their life is very different nowadays, right? So yes, I mean, accepting that sometimes sludges are good is important. Saying that maybe it's not a sludge in the definitional perspective, but a nudge or a boost, yeah, maybe it's just, a bit of theoretically fancying things up. But the logic is to be able to explain this and, to use the names when it is more convincing for a particular case, I would say. Yes, but thank you for your comment. I think it sums it up very nicely. Yeah. Okay, so we moved a bit on our time, but I would propose the classical 10 minutes break, if you agree.
Sí, está bien.
Yes, thank you.
10 minutes. So for you, 10 minutes after 12 for me. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Amigos, ok. Amigos, amigas, este mes de febrero tenemos a la Universidad de Milán. La profesora Raviole comparte su estudio sobre Botero. Giovanni Botero es un jesuita, pensador político del siglo XVII, que tuvo gran influencia española, ¿no? Del Imperio Español, que tiene pues experiencia en América. Y el curso de 4 sesiones, el profesor Minuti, director del Centro Interuniversitario de Estudios Globales de la Universidad de Florencia, comparte su estudio sobre la ilustración. Él especialmente es dedicado al pensamiento de Montesquieu. Entonces, en febrero tenemos esta propuesta para ustedes. pueden ver en el canal YouTube del Vicerrectorado Académico la solicitud que está en el chat. Estos 2 últimos años se hicieron más de 40 videoconferencias, material que está en el canal YouTube del Vicerrectorado Académico. Se tienen que comunicar con el Vicerrectorado Académico por correo electrónico. Este mes de febrero, las conferencias serán dadas en italiano, siendo el idioma del seminario inglés, y las principales lenguas romances. Gracias.
Okay. Um, so to continue this, I mean, for sludges, there is also this interesting typology. I mean, it can spur some ideas about where we can spot sludges, in terms of access, in terms of complexity, but also in terms of what they called insecurity, So this idea of increasing doubt, hesitancy, regret. And I think that, yes, in many cases, this idea of having actually clearer next steps, what to do, minimizes this approach that can be a sludge in the sense of discouraging people to follow up on something. And an interesting exercise here is this idea proposed of having a type of sludge audit, So basically to see in your organizations, of course, I was thinking about my university, but there are too many, so I stopped. But of course, that the logic would be just to actually actively think about where these points of discouragement or these points of, putting people in the other direction that you would want appear, right? And in many cases, this could be both for students and for teachers in terms of how the systems and the procedures of the university are developed and also communicated, because in many cases the error could be also in the information. So I think that this is a good exercise to have and to share, about how and how we can actually redesign this type of sludges. And yeah, this is again just a table on areas of an organization at universities, but commercial organization in general, where this type of difficulties could appear and how they could actually be minimized by trying to provide clearer, less complex procedures or forms and so on. So these are just some points of inspiration. And yes, and there is also this approach in terms of government. So this is from the New Zealand government, in Australia, they developed this type of sludge toolkit for their public bodies on how to reduce sludge on website, how to actually find information in letters and in the forms that one needs to fill, in the type of phone or face-to-face conversation, how to be more on point, on clearer, and of course, even in text or in messages. So again, at the end of the day, I believe that this is something that, as an intervention was existing before. We were maybe trying to be more efficient, but it was not necessarily narrowed down at the decision point, and how systematically people actually are not being able to decide, or that they decide worse because of this. So I think that labeling this as a sludge audit, or as sludge, or as the discussion if something is actually by design a sludge or just by accident, this can actually improve the process per se. And I think that with this, we can easily move into this last point, which is, how to put together all this type of information about behaviors and decisions that, maybe we already knew in one form or another, or maybe we just are being exposed now at it. But in the end, there are various streams of information, a lot of evidence. So how to actually put this at use? so that it becomes actionable, this is still a challenge. So in line with what we've discussed, how to, be closer to an action and to a better decision, than by using an approach that would guide you to identifying critical points and maybe to suggest some solutions. So these are basically these frameworks of behavior change, and there is more than one of there. So yes, these ones are, as it is written here, the initial approaches of trying to organize things in something that it is easier to use. And this actually comes more from the practical side of people working with behavioral insights in this type of nudge units around the world. And nudge units are either bodies that are attached to governments, and some of the strongest ones were in the US and in the UK. Right, the behavioral insights team called in both cases, and they were linked to the government. Or in other cases, they are separate and they work, as consultancies or as NGOs. But the idea is that, in order to scale this, and to have more than one intervention as a research approach, and to be able to address different sectors, you need a tool that is going to help your team to work. And these are this type of frameworks that we will refer. So the first one actually was this idea of influencing behavior by looking at this mind space approach. So this is from 2010. And basically what it was at the beginning was simply saying you have a checklist, of these 9 points that you need to consider in relation to, a particular decision, a particular behavior, right? So you can, start from looking at who is communicating the information, what incentives are in place, what norms are functioning in that context, if there is a default or the possibility of setting one, if there is information that is more salient because our attention is going to go in that direction, if we can, prime people with some type of pieces of information. So basically just, creating environments with, certain images, musics, discussions about things. To what extent there is place for emotions in what we have, and basically what's negative, what's positive about it. How you can make people commit, and then how we can work around people's egos. So this is, as I was saying, a checklist. It's an initial perspective that it may not be the most useful one, because again there is still a lot of information that one needs to structure, but nonetheless it is a short response just to understand a bit what would be more relevant from these cues here, if it's more about emotional approaches, or if it's more about, incentives that are not aligned, and so on. So it was, the initial approach. Another one that was also early on, a couple of years later, 2014, was called the East Framework. And this was basically something that say, how one would judge an intervention, a policy, how you can make things to stick more or to generate more change by looking at these 4 characteristics. To what extent is something easy to do by people? To what extent it's, your intervention, it's timely, so it affects their decision there. This, for instance, seems super obvious, that it should be timely, but it's actually very relevant in practice. And here there's a lot of evidence about how ineffective financial literacy programs are in general, because they teach people, about better interest and inflation in general, but they are not timely in the sense that their input is not close to the moment when we have to decide something. So I learn about something, but then, at the end of the month, probably I'm going to do the budget the same or the investment the same, or when I go to do a credit, I may forgot about this. And in many cases, this type of general information that is there doesn't change behavior, at least not based on how much it is invested in this type of programs, because the timing is not right, so you want to have interventions that are closer to this type of decision points. And then again, if it's attractive and if it's social. So attractive in the sense of, what type of benefits it provides. And yes, again, many interventions tend to favor normative messages. Here, I have in mind an experiment that looks at how people perceive an intervention based on two very clear characteristics: if it's fun or if it's good for your health. The intervention in case was trying to convince people to walk the stairs when they were exiting the subway and not to take the rolling stairs, or the elevator. So basically, they were testing the effect of messages like, walking the stairs could be fun if you are with a friend and so on, or walking the stairs is good for your health. And the expectations of public health experts was, of course, if you tell people that this is good for their health, they should be more convinced, because of course it's for their own health, and, any rational person would want to be healthy and so on and so forth. But the message that stick the most, and it was more relevant, was because, you have a pattern, it is more fun. So to be attractive is actually, and this means fun, pleasant, with some benefits that are spot on and not later in time. It's something that, even if we don't like it, by comparison to things that are good for us, actually pushes people more into this direction. So we should not ignore it. And the same goes, for the logic of having things that are social, in the sense that, if there is some public element that could, make one interact a bit better, feel more visible or more liked in a group and so on, this is something that again pushes the intervention. So a different type of checklist again, so not super structured, but something that has been able to clean some of the interventions that various public authorities have, and to give them this direction that it is not something for marketing sake, but actually for for efficiency's sake, so it's not the idea of being easy and attractive. It's not a tool for selling this, but it is a tool for actually pushing people to change a particular behavior. And the tool that has been later on developed, and that is much more complex, but also much more constructive. And, I suggest that it may bring much more clarity if you're interested in, putting what we've discussed in these classes in the purpose of, changing one particular behavior, is this methodology called the behavior change wheel. That it is more complex because it actually goes from a micro level, the one that is the inner one, the green one, in which we have a diagnostic for the sources of behavior based on these three pillars that we're going to mention. Then it looks at the first layer of the environment, and the type of interventions that could be used to address a particular diagnostic, and the interventions are comprehensive. So they are not simply saying, you should nudge people. They are saying, well, maybe what you lack here is a part of, educating people about, the dangers of throwing waste in certain places, or not considering, the implication of energy use and so on. So maybe it's part of education. Maybe it's part of changing the environment, because it's not necessarily something that is related to their capability, but it is more related to how much they have the opportunity to do things. So for instance, there are very many behavioral intervention discussing how we can change people behavior in terms of transportation, so convince them to go more with the bike than with the car, or by foot. And in many cities, the problem is that you do not have good sidewalks or good places for biking. So in order to convince them, you can have as many information as you want and education, but you need to provide infrastructure. So this is something that deals with the environment first and for all. And I mean, for many, for others, the examples follow. But what I want to highlight is that this red layer is not only about nudges, so they could be there, but it's about, understanding better what should we use based on what we've discovered first, what are the sources of behavior. And the outer layer here, the gray one, goes beyond this and says, so what should we do in terms of policy measures? We should change something in terms of the fiscal measures. We should provide new services. We should communicate better. We should provide guidelines and so on. And of course, some of them are easier to do. So, providing guidelines, it's relatively simple, but again, it's not something that is that common in some public services. Changing regulations could be more complicated, so you need a better case. So this wheel actually is able to, include a much wider analysis about what one needs to do, and at various levels. That's why we have these free approaches. So just to put a bit things in perspectives, because this is something that you're going to find in many papers. So if you want to see, behavioral change wheel in how to make, people use less antibiotics, to exercise more, to smoke less, to be more active, again, to have more public transportation, to communicate more, to participate more into community, or to conserve energies. These are all things that you're going to be able to find in the research papers. So now you can just search behavioral change wheels in various fields and you're going to find it. And what is relevant when you have a methodological approach is that you can follow how people have approached this type of steps that we have here. So the first step, the inner one, is to understand these three layers of behavior: capability, motivation, and opportunity, and to be able to pinpoint, what would be the combination of cases, or what would be the root cause of them, so that you adapt the later intervention exactly to your first type of analysis. So if you want, this first part is the behavioral research in itself, then it's mapping with other cases. So in order to actually use the framework, the first stage is to be very, very specific, and we're going to have some examples on what you actually want to achieve. And in this case is to define your problem in clear behavioral terms, and this seems obvious, because we consider that we are good at spotting problems, but in many cases we spot the problems, but not necessarily the behavior behind it. So when we say students are not motivated, so I want more motivated students, but then when I consider this in behavioral terms, I say, okay, so very specifically, what do I want? Maybe I want various things in this. So I may need to have a list of behaviors. Maybe I want them to attend classes more. Maybe I want them to read more. Maybe I want them to work better in teams. Maybe I want them to write me more emails or less emails. So I can do a list of, 5 to 10 behaviors. And then I want to understand what I really, really want in terms of one of them, select the target and to see, what needs to change. More attendance to my classes. So this means that I want them in class from 4 participation to 10 participation. I want active participation in the sense, in class with no phone. I want, a different type of interaction. So this goes at a very, very granular level of definition, because this is the way to actually map the problem to a concrete tool. If not, I'm going to stay at a very general level that could, lead to some results. But if I want to measure impact very specifically, I need to start specific from the beginning. So if I solve this, and that's why it's bigger, because it's actually it is a decision problem itself with what I start. And of course, that in many cases, most people, all of us, we want to solve everything. But, reality is that you need to consider what is the priority, that matrix with everything is important and everything is urgent. So you cannot work with this. From all the important things and all the urgent things, you need to choose the most important, the most urgent. Yes, and then, of course, that you map this with these 2 layers, interventions and policy categories. And then in the implementation part, when you decide to do training or behavior modification of the environment or whatever else, here is the part when one can go back to what we've discussed about nudges, boosts, sludges, cognitive biases, and so on, and to find the techniques that are actually more efficient for a situation, So maybe defaults are better, or social norms, or better visualization. But this is somehow at the end on how you implement this. And in most cases, and probably it's never only about one particular technique, but it is a combination of things, and that's why it's important to remain humble in terms of, yes, maybe you have 1 nudge or 2, but this is in relation to on how you can increase the appeal of an education project or a training, or the appeal of some guidelines and so on. So they are usually in the purpose of something else. So to go back to this logic of breaking down problems, because we have that many problems, into very specific behaviors, I put here an example on how to move from a hot topic to small approaches. Sorry. So, for instance, I tend to discuss this also with my students when they choose their topics, and they tend to choose broad topics for dissertations or for thesis, because, of course, they believe that they're going to be able to find information easier and just to write more, but not necessarily to be more efficient. So usually the discussion starts with this. I want to do something about sustainability, because sustainability is such a big thing and we have it everywhere, and it is important to be more sustainable, right? And then you go narrowing down step by step. So what are potential sources of not being sustainable? We use too much plastic, we have too many CO2 emissions, we have fossil energy, and the list could go on. So from this list, you say, okay, I want to focus on reducing dioxide emissions. So what is discussed as a potential solution to do this? We should travel less by plane, we should eat less meat. This is very common but less intuitive. We should use less cars or switch to electric cars, or we should buy foods that are just locally produced and not important. So all of them have pros and cons. The idea is that there are many. Again, you want to consider one, and then to put specificity into that particular behavior that you want. So if I'm considering, eating less meat, this is a general behavior. What I want to focus is on a target. Stop eating meat and eat vegetarian food, for instance, on a case by case. And then the all coordinated behavior would be, how might we make people eat vegetarian on Mondays, so not in general, but on a particular day. So this creates a very focused approach. This was a campaign, and it went down with this idea that go meatless Monday is good for you, it's good for the planet. So it's a nice communication. But beyond the communication, the logic here is to have a target that it is well specified. Of course, that again, we know this in many cases, I don't know, from, smart objectives, if you want. So this is a smart objective because I say exactly what I want, but with clear boundaries. I want this on a Monday, and for what reason. So this is the critical point into creating the proper analysis afterwards, because this is a confusion that appears very often. So we want to consider the behavior and not the outcome per se. Who is doing the behavior? Not what happens as a result. So if I'm applying the meatless Monday approach, I want to see, I want this for students, I want this for everyone, I want this in a particular restaurant, basically to consider this as a very focused approach. And another characteristic here is that when we speak about behaviors, and again, we tend to know this, but not always consider them in practice, is that we want to analyze things that are observable. A lot of the research that is also conducted looks at, how to make people more aware about the environment. But awareness is not observable. So we can focus on this, so we can educate and we can do. But when I'm looking at behavior, I want to see something that I can actually measure specifically, and directly. Attitudes, we measure them with scales, with, potential other types of proxies, but they are approximations. Behavior means, I care more about the environment. Yes, I want to see this range of behavior, transportation, eating, using plastics or not using it, and so on and so forth, So this is also very important when we are considering the mindset with which we start a project, because the correct mindset here is to be able to articulate who needs to change. We can simply say everyone needs to change here. Or we can say specifically, some people, but not us. But this is not going to help us in creating an efficient strategy on how to do this. Yes, so these are just cases of what we see in terms of differences between outcomes and behaviors. Yes, we want people in our team to be more satisfied. But what is the behavior that leads to greater satisfaction? Or customers, responding on time, giving feedback, discussing politely. These are areas to tackle, not just saying more satisfaction. Or what I was saying before, I want, higher level of performance, but what I believe is the behavior linked to that higher level of performance, or the behaviors. There could be many, but still we cannot be so naive so that we expect that with one strategy we're going to solve all. The choice of the most important one means also the choice through which we may hope to create a bit of a snowball effect, so I make them attend the class, or I focus on how to do this. Maybe there are going to be various spillovers. I send them nice material to read. I, put them in groups. So this is also going to work on other levels, but I need to decide with what I start first. Yeah. So yes, these are a couple of common mistakes further to consider when we employ this strategy. So the first one is just results and not behavior. Yes, the second one is very similar, but it further says that what we miss is this idea of trying to understand as documented as possible what would be the reason, is the first part of the behavioral change wheel. What would be the diagnosis? And in many cases, this is a very, sensitive area, because the very simplistic and often wrong diagnosis is people do not want to change. People don't want to do this. They do not want to make an effort. I mean, it's not that they cannot be true. Maybe parts of them are true, but they're also not constructive at all. So the purpose here is to be specific for the sake of being constructive. If we're just normative and labeling things, we're going to feel better, smarter, but we're not going to solve the problem. And the issue here is how to solve it. Yes. Then, a third thing that is heavily linked with, some of the parts that we've discussed, but not with all of them, is this gap that often appears between what we hope to get and what we actually do. So basically, just asking people if they are aware that it's good to save more for financial well-being and so on. You can look at a lot of global surveys and they say everyone, most of people say, yes, I want to save more. I want to do better with money. I want. But this is not necessarily followed by behavior. And in some cases, we retake the definition. It can be part of the information. In many others, it's part of the environment and, our shortcomings that need to be addressed through this type of behavioral approaches that we've discussed. So the logic is that, yes, in some cases, people are completely not aware of what would mean to do better. And then, there's a different path. In other cases, they are aware, but it doesn't follow immediately, as we've discussed. Yes, and this part of motivating people is maybe also from your experience one of the most difficult ones. And there are this type of thresholds here, from moving to I really have no desire to do this, until reaching maybe something like, well, if I do this, I can really achieve some type of goals versus, I love doing this. Yeah, so there are critical aspects here in between, for instance, having this type of introjection. I've understood this, so I better do this in order to get this out of my chest, versus changing into, okay, it feels better, so I really see some type of purpose here. So having a bit, of a meter for motivation. This is also very useful in various projects that we have. And of course, yes, it's always important to be realistic. If you really start from, I have no desire to do this, maybe one project is not enough to reach the other side of intrinsic. So you need a couple of them in order to reach your point, and so on. Yeah. So these are a couple of starting points that could be useful, hopefully, if you want to do this more formally or informally, because of course I believe that informally we may tend to change other people's behavior in various occasions, but we don't necessarily do this systematically. And it doesn't mean that one needs to follow all the steps, but it is important maybe to identify some of the steps in which we are maybe against the evidence, and just try to see, if you turn a bit and if you look through this type of checklist, to this type of approaches, what could be improved. So I mean, my outcome, because or my KPI, my success impact of the class would simply be this. If you are reconsidering maybe some of your behaviors or beliefs or approaches that you have, there is always a good time to consider what would be your fresh start effect. It could be after the class, or a Monday, or a Friday, or a beginning of the month, and so on. And I think it is important to have this type of points in which we are reanalyzing a bit what seems to be our patterns of decisions, and how we can improve them. And of course, yes, this doesn't mean that the things that we've discussed should be applied at the letter of the law, So we do still have a lot of autonomy in, deciding how to use them, maybe as inspiration, maybe as knowledge to share it with other people. But I believe that this, in the words of this author, Katie Milkman, is something that is actually quite progressive, quite gradual. As she says, is more like treating a chronic disease, not curing some particular rash. So it requires long-term. It's normal that we're going to have this type of obstacles, and the choice here is to remain vigilant and to refresh from time to time with some type of new information. The last slide that I liked in terms of refreshing mindset is maybe changing a bit our focus from what we may do quite often, defending our own beliefs, try to win an argument, try to protect our identity, the way we see things, and to convince people about other aspects. So this is something that is defined as being in a soldier mindset, very executional and very protective with ourselves, and move at least from time to time to the scout mindset, which means that we really want to see things in their reality, not as we would wish them to be. So it's sometimes they can interfere, but not always. So actually searching for something that it is more truthful than convincing ourselves about this is one way that could guide us through, ethical misdemeanors, to, things that are a bit more, uncomfortable, but nonetheless, it could put us closer to what we want to achieve. Yeah. So thank you for your participation to this class.
Thank you, Rodica. Rodica, I would like to, draga Rodica, eti membra Comunitati Universitati San Marco.
Muchas gracias. I'm very honored.
Ja, Universitati di in Amerika. e ti professora care a iniziare relatia dintre se la due università alle nostra. Thank you very much. Con el
Thank you.
tiempo, Rodica, con el tiempo se escribirá y se compartirá que inicias esa relación con San Marcos, con la cuatricentenaria, en menos de 30 años, 5 siglos, Universidad Peruana y Americana. Entonces, con el tiempo se va a subrayar y destacar la actividad. Muchas gracias, Rodica. Estamos atentos a tus actividades académicas y tu primera experiencia en Sudamérica, por supuesto. Por supuesto. Hay tiempo, hay tiempo. Tenemos pues muy atentos como tu área académica, ¿no? Les he compartido a todos, amigos, los links de la Universidad de Bucarest y se destaca pues como en el centro de investigación, el centro de Sharing Economy Comportamental Applicata, está a cargo de Rodica, el centro de Sharing Economy Comportamental Applicata, que es parte de la Facultad de Administración que está Rodica. Entonces, muy atentos, ¿por qué no? Pensar ese tema, economía, comportamiento, acá en Lima, con la experiencia de Bucarest, y desde Sudamérica en Lima, Perú, ¿no? Una propuesta para Sudamérica y para otros países.
Thank you so much, Hector. I think you are doing a very great job in implementing, this nudges, the first professor to be from the university and to establish relations. So you're creating identity and commitment. So you're by nature very good at this. Yes, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to interact. I would like to clearly create more collaboration from this, and I believe that there is room also to do this online. So if some of your students maybe want to do a small type of experiment, a small type of survey, some smaller, comparative research that we could do together, some type of other presentations, I think there is room, to keep in touch by email. I would be happy to consider this type of perspectives. And thank you so much for all your comments along the way. I know that sometimes, as a teacher, you tend to say, yes, this is good, and you respond and you move forward because you have something to teach. But honestly, clearly, with every comment, there is something that maybe I haven't thought in this way, So it is, I know that because you're teachers, you understand this, but it's really important, to formulate this, which was helpful for me. My next class maybe is going to be better because of you, so thank you about this.
Sí,
yes.
Rodica, así
Sí.
como Claudia el año pasado, Ámbar son el futuro, el presente y el futuro de la universidad, proyectando que continúen su experiencia con Bucarest, muy atentos a tus estudiantes que puedan conocer nuestra universidad y puedan también tener esta experiencia transnacional, sudamericana, andina en Lima. Es muy difícil, hay grandes desafíos, pero toda la atención para fortalecer a nuestros jóvenes estudiantes, tanto de Bucarest como de Lima.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hector, for being such a huge engine of connecting things here, and actually to, prove impact, because it was just an email and we've connected. So actually, it's not that hard. We tend to believe that things are more complex behind this, but at the end, it's just a matter of communicating at the right moment, and the right way. So I think you're a proof in
Ámbar,
practice.
como alumna, ¿podrías dar tu experiencia del curso, por favor?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Professor Rodica, for all the knowledge, all the experience, all the seasons were very very grateful for all of us. I think we learn a lot about the notch, about the bows, and every season were like a top of knowledge to us. I start like not knowing so much about all that term or comportation, behavior, and I think during the seasons you start teaching us like in a way that we can understand it, in a way that you teach us like the since the some concepts to them to just some strategies, some papers to other investigators. So it was a grateful experience. I really like this experience. I understand it like in a way that it was like starting to topics understandable to us, and it make it a great experience. So yeah, it's an enriching season, I think, and well, we all like this season. It's very grateful to have you here. It's very grateful to have this experience with you. You are an awesome person and also teacher also. So thank you very much for this. I would like to say more, but I think I don't have enough words to express it. But thank you.
Thank you, Amber. And you've. I mean, I think that it's actually important to say that you are right on point with so many comments. I mean, it's not just commenting for the sake, but you are, I mean, very, very spot on expressing things. So thank you. I mean, it's very refreshing to see enthusiasm and people that are actually going into this direction. So yes, thank you so much for being and helping.
Please, Rodica, I would like to take a picture. Amigos y amigas, pueden prender un momento sus cámaras para tomar una captura, por favor. Sí, muchas gracias. Un momento. Una, dos. Bien, gracias a todos.
Gracias, and yeah, keep in touch. Talk soon. I'm sure there are going to be more opportunities to further connect.
Entonces, Rodica, recuerda, eres sanmarquina, te consideramos sanmarquina y
Gracias.
estamos atentos a que puedas estar en Lima según tu programación.
Sí, muchas gracias por todo.
Muchas gracias, amigos y amigas, por su tiempo, por su disponibilidad. Y nos encontramos este 9 de febrero con la profesora Alice Raviola de Milano y continuamos estas experiencias académicas. Gracias a todos. Estamos en contacto.
Profesor, la lista de asistencia.
Thank you very much, Rodica.
Chao, gracias.
See you. Keep on contact.
Yeah.